Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Welcome to the podcast. In this podcast episode, I talk with Elan Divon about engaging and retaining young talent. Elan Divon, welcome to the conversation today.
Pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to be with you. Where are you joining us from?
Toronto, Canada.
Wonderful. I'm joining us from south of Salt Lake City in Utah. Today, we're going to be talking about engaging and retaining young talent. I think there's a lot that gets packed into this kind of a conversation. So we're going to try to unpack this, explore this, and try to better understand how organizations can better work with younger millennial and Gen Z workers today, but also moving into the future. As we get started, I wanted to share Elan's bio with everybody. Elan Divon is a Harvard-trained author, speaker, and founder of the Divon Academy, an organization that helps students and young professionals develop essential work life and leadership skills that companies want, but perhaps schools don't teach, and technology is disrupted at a time when they are needed the most. Now, I could go on and share more about Divon, but I'm going to pause there. Anything else you would like to highlight by way of your personal background or context or that of Divon Academy before we dive on in?
I'll just say I am someone that has been passionate for many, many years, decades now, in human potential and helping people unleash potential. And so our focus, my focus, and the focus of Divon Academy is on younger professionals. We're living in an age where both growing up with screens and then the pandemic came along, they've just had a more difficult time in developing a lot of skills, soft skills, that today are really important for success in the workforce, but also for well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very challenging time. The pandemic took a toll, I think, for younger workers in particular. I can speak from just experience with my own family. I have two daughters who are now college age, who were completely disrupted during the pandemic, during their late middle school or high school years. And it took a toll, and they were troopers, and they came out of it, I think, overall better for it. But in certain ways, they were set back a bit, and they had to really work at making sure that they were ready. And I think there are many younger people who found themselves in similar circumstances, and some who perhaps didn't have the support to make sure that they were coming out of it prepared to be successfthe. So I think this is super important. It's always been important, but I think it's particularly important right now, given the recent context and the geopolitical, social, and economic landscape, and like all the stuff that's going on that people are trying to deal with while navigating disruption in the workplace, new technologies that are shifting the way we do our work. All of that's happening simultaneously. And it's a hard time, I think, particularly for younger workers. Well, let's dive on in and talk about how we can go about engaging and retaining young talent. So it's an interesting time in the workforce. The labor market is tight. There have been mass layoffs in tech firms and stuff, but despite that, there's still a tight labor market. It's still kind of a buyer's market. Organizations are struggling to find great talent, and that's been an issue for a while, particularly in STEM fields and healthcare and in a variety of different types of industries. And we have many generations in the workforce simultaneously. So you have baby boomers and Gen X, you have millennials, you have Gen Z, and trying to figure out like how to help everyone cohesively work well together when they come from vastly different backgrounds and worldviews, different experiences from a technological standpoint, etc. With all that kind of in mind as kind of setting the stage for the current context, thoughts and ideas, tips for how we can engage and retain younger people, knowing that baby boomers are retiring. We need to find people to lead the next generation of these organizations.
Yeah, well, I think, I'll start with the common denominator. I think for all generations, I think that there's a famous saying, people go where they feel welcome, but they stay where they feel valued and appreciated. And obviously,
Yeah.
everybody wants to feel valued and appreciated. I think so that goes across generations. I think with Gen Z and millennials, I think particularly Gen Z, the way they feel valued and appreciated is a little bit different, or the way that leads to that. And I think the key word for Gen Z is, it's flexibility.
Yeah.
But I think the number one thing they're looking for, which is for a number of reasons, but it may not be surprising, is pay. And this is because we have to understand the context in which Gen Z grew up, and also, of course, the context in which you're living today. So there's a generation, also millennials, that grew up experiencing and living through the Great Recession, when parents were losing jobs, when they had to leave homes, when they had siblings or older siblings coming home to live at home because they couldn't afford rent, elsewhere. So the Great Recession has really been imprinted on their psyche. They saw their parents struggling financially, and they're saying to themselves, we don't want to have the same predicament. At the same time, they also saw their parents struggling and working so hard and being very stressed, and yet still not getting the kind of life that necessarily they wanted. And so they're also saying to themselves, you know what, we're not going to kill ourselves over the job. We want to also take care of our mental health and well-being. So pivot to today's time, and we know that housing prices are where they're at. Inflation, rising prices, etc. And so you have a generation that is looking for security, is looking for financial security. Very hard to find it. One of the reasons why Gen Z is really keen on, and when they'll look at a job listing, for example, if it doesn't say flexibility, 70-80% of them will not even look at that job if there's no flexibility. And the reason for that, part of the reason for that, is that when working, and now everyone's used to hybrid work and they want hybrid work, although they do also want to come into an office. I think there's a lot of misconceptions that Gen Z are lazy or they don't want to work in the office. They do value and want community, but they want the flexibility of being hybrid because it allows them to work and live in a place where it's more affordable. So the affordability factor is very important, not having to live right in the center of the city or next to the office, but living in a place where it's a little bit more affordable. We also need to remember that Gen Z grew up, especially in the United States, at a time when they never experienced a moment of unity in America. Obama to Trump, there's a lot of political polarization, a lot of instability. They've been through the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter and the Arab Spring, and it's all been about revolution and change and the dissolution of old structures. So this is a generation that is both used to and seen what it's like to rebel against existing structures, but also looking for stability. So I think to bring it back to the simple question of how to retain and engage young talent is, yes, we want to provide them with the stability and security of good pay. If we can't provide the kind of pay they're looking for, I think the next best thing is, and the flexibility, then you want to provide them for opportunities and a horizon for gaining that kind of security, which means learning opportunities. Learning opportunities is absolutely critical for Gen Z because they recognize that's the key for their professional growth, but also for their financial security. Yeah,
absolutely. Well said. I want to double click on a few of those points and dive into them a little bit deeper, but also first to highlight another way of kind of framing what you were just sharing in my mind is just this general degrading of trust in institutions. So as we look at younger millennial and Gen Z in particular, there is a tremendous amount of distrust in institutions, political institutions, economic institutions, organizations, companies, right? There's a broader societal trend towards that, but it's particularly driven by younger people who, to your point, have experienced a lot of discord and challenging times. And it's fundamentally different to be a young person today than it was when I was a kid versus when my parents were kids, in terms of just the opportunity. We often talk about the American dream, for example, and that's a really wonderful aspirational idea. But if it still exists, it doesn't exist in the same way today for my kids as it did for my parents. It just doesn't. Housing prices and wages have not kept up with inflation and housing prices, and it's just so much harder now for young people to get a leg up. And not to say that my parents' generation didn't have to work hard. They did. Of course they did. But you can work really hard today and still not find your footing. And that, I think, is a big difference.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. The American dream, I was talking to my cousin in New York. He's 28, 29 years old. And he says to me, Elan, the American dream is no longer attainable for me in my generation, because the idea of owning a home is so far removed from anyone that's just lacking. If you don't have parents and the kind of support and parents that can help you put down a large down payment on a home, there is no way for the average American, for example, or Canadian, or European, or anyone for that matter today to afford a home in these conditions. So I think the whole dream is changing. I think also what people are looking for is changing. I think the notion of having a career and is no longer tenable anymore either. People aren't looking for careers; they're looking, and that's not the aspiration, because you're not looking to climb the career ladder and get to a certain position. I think we know from the statistics that young people will have 12, 15 jobs by the time they're 40, 45, and they're also going to have to pivot and reinvent themselves because of disruption. I mean, the shelf life of skills today of technical skills is about 2 years, meaning if you learn a technical skill, the way things are moving, in about 2.5 years, you're going to have to learn a completely new skill, because that skill will be redundant in 2 years from now. So I think this is changing what it means to have a career, what it means to work in an industry, and how young people are looking at the workforce. At the same time, their values are changing in terms of what they're even looking for in life. I think young people aren't even looking to get married and have kids because of the affordability factor as well. And so there's so many changes going on in terms of values, in terms of just financial realities that are changing the priorities of what young people look for in life and in the job as well.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned this a few minutes ago. There's often this, I also view it as a misconception. You framed it as a misconception. I know people will disagree with us, but when I hear folks talk about these young, entitled millennial or Gen Z students or workers, I bristle at that, because are there entitled folks? Of course there are. Every generation has entitled people and people who are lazy and don't want to work, and that's not unique to this younger generation. But they get labeled that way, and I think a big reason behind why they're getting labeled that way is to what you were just saying. Their priorities have shifted, their values have shifted. So what may have been important to my parents' generation or even to my generation isn't necessarily important to them. They're also not willing to put up with maybe what we were willing to put up with. I'm a university professor. I teach students how to run successful organizations. I teach them how to lead effectively. And they come out of my courses and out of my program knowing a better way. And they're not willing to go into the workforce and slog in a crappy job with a crappy boss for a crummy organization for 20 years, hoping that maybe someday they'll have their chance. There's just that the psychological contract of the workplace has shifted so dramatically that there's really no horizon for that for most young people. They're not going to be staying in the same job or the same company for a long period of time. And so they want to go and they want it to be a good experience, and they know it should be. They know people should know better, and they're holding them accountable. And then other workers who maybe put up with it and were willing to put up with it say, oh, well, you're entitled. You're not willing to pay your dues. I think that's silly. I think they're just holding organizations and leaders accountable for what they should have been doing all along.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point. I think there is a lot of nuance here. So
Sure,
there
yeah,
are elements of the sort of the Gen Z or younger mindset that is just thinks differently. So I'll give you, I always go to this example of dating. Okay. So, in the past, when you and I we were going out, we were looking for a partner, we just wanted to date someone. You went into let's say a bar or a restaurant, wherever it was, and you had to go up to somebody and you had to have probably an awkward conversation and be a little bit uncomfortable, maybe get rejected, work on your personality a bit to try and like charm the other person. And that's how that was how dating worked. In the past, you actually had to meet somebody. Today, because of apps, it's all, obviously swipe this way or that. I guess what I'm getting at is that the tolerance of discomfort is lower by virtue of because of technology, and dating is just one example. So you don't have to engage in difficult, awkward conversations or step into discomfort. I think the notion of, in some cases, safe zones also on campus can be detrimental, because the point, I think, of going to school is to be able to engage in difficult, complex ideas that you don't necessarily agree with, and to have difficult conversations. I think life is all about learning to deal with discomfort, because life can be uncomfortable. Even your dream job can be uncomfortable. So I think that, I guess all of this is to say that technology in the world young people are growing up in is just limiting their opportunities to engage in discomfort, because you can easily sort of, again, swipe and just go someone if you don't want to talk to them anymore, instead of having that conversation in the past, which would have been more not so comfortable. So I think it's a combination of, yes, there are shifting priorities and values, which is legitimate and I think is a good thing, but there's also a lowering of the bar when it comes to, for example, tolerance of stress and discomfort, which leads to heightened mental health issues as well, because we have an inability to tolerate differences. And everyone today is in their echo chambers. Look at the politics, for example. Everyone just listens to people that they agree with. The moment someone disagrees with you, it's either fight or flight. You cannot just, and it's more difficulty engaging in these kinds of more difficult conversations.
Yeah. And you highlight a much bigger problem, a societal kind of ill that we need to figure out how to address, because the art of just having civil dialogue and civil debate has largely vanished, it seems, unfortunately. And certainly it can be hard for younger people, but man, I see that at all levels, trying to have conversations with people who disagree with you. In my generation, my parents' generation, their parents' generation, it's a hard thing right now. So this is something we need to, that's a continued conversation, I think, for another day. But great points. Well, Divon, I note the time. I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute. But before we wrap things up for today, I did want to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
To find us, you visit us at Divon Academy, which is www.divonacademy.com. We're working today with companies. So we work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies in training their young talent and emerging talent and first-time managers, for example. But we also work with universities. In fact, Jonathan, we just launched and just put together a course which is now being adopted by business schools across the United States for credit, is being blended in as a 4-credit course to prepare students for the workforce and for success in the workforce. So this is a course that can be taken in schools, but it's also a course that you can take online through our website and just log on, find it on the University Solutions tab, and take this course if you're a student, to prepare yourself for the workforce as well, and learn basically what we've packed into it are the 6 most in-demand skills that employers are looking for and professionals today must have to be successful, particularly in an age of disruption.
Thank you, Divon. It has just been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, check out the Divon Academy. As always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.